Hello folks, welcome to my YouTube channel, Watercolor Impressions. Cherry blossoms happen in Toronto in end of April and early of May, and it provides a magical sight across the city and welcomes the spring. Before you go, hit the subscribe button so you guys can get weekly video updates from our channel. And let's get started, guys. I always keep my drawing really simple because I want to see where everything goes, so it kind of acts as a map for me. So in watercolors, you always start with a light wash. So I'm starting with the sky. So that's the biggest shape in our reference. And I'm also trying to combine the sky with the foreground element, the foreground cherry blossom tree. And I'm using a little bit of pink and a little bit of red and a little bit of white paint in it, because I want to get a little bit of transparency in it. And you can also mix a little bit of blue in it as well, but you can see in the shadow side. And I want to try to mix everything as one thing as possible. You can see I'm also splattering some of the paints on top of it as well, because it's one of the painful thing to paint is painting individual leaves on a tree. So I want to make sure that to expedite the process as well, and it also makes painting less stressful. So you have to, as a painter, try to come up with ways where you can simplify your painting, where you can simplify your process as well. So now I'm focusing on the midground. So the midground, I want to create a glow, so that's why I kept a little bit of a pale yellow in the midground. As it comes to the foreground, I'm increased the pigment consistency a little bit, and as it comes to the foreground, I'm also introducing a little bit of a warmer wash, because that's going to be covered with the shadow. And in the reference you can't see it that much, but there's the lake shore which is behind the background, so I want to add that first. And I'm also leaving white bits because there's going to be tree as well. And this exhibition place and this building where there's a lot of event happens, but I want to make sure to use this block this as a single shape. So whenever you paint, think everything as shapes. Don't think it's a building or anything like that, and think like, what is the quickest thing I can think of this building. So it can be a couple of rectangles and a couple of squares on top of it. And I'm also adding a little bit of tree in the distance, because I want to connect the piece with the building as well. And it also creates this big, medium and smaller shapes in our painting as well. So whenever you paint, there is one composition element which is really necessary in any kind of painting we do, is having bigger shapes, medium shapes and smaller shapes. So that provides a lot of contrast in our shapes as well, and that also provides a little bit of visually pleasing to eyes to a viewer. So I'm adding the midground elements, and there is a couple of cars there I'm trying to block in. And I'm also adding a truck which is there, and it also helps us to create that shadow where it's coming from, and it also creates illumination of light as well. So I'm adding the trees which is in the midground. In the tree in the midground, I don't want to add more details on it. I want to make it simple as possible, because our focal point, our vision and everything is about the cherry blossom tree, and which is in the foreground, and the shadows which is peeking through will take us into the painting. So that's what I'm trying to do, and I'm also trying to move the trees in such a way that we can also see the background building as well, because it looks majestic. So now when I blocked in my figures, I've noticed that my figures is a little bit smaller, but I went with the vision. And if I would have done this painting again, this is what you realize when you do painting a lot. You start realizing where you're doing your mistakes, and you can go and fix it. And I also like the figures a little bit smaller, because that also creates a little bit of a scale in our painting as well, because I want the cherry blossom tree to be bigger. And there's also a picnic happening in our park. This is near Exhibition Place in Toronto. It was quite surprising. This year there's a lot of people in this spot than usually. There is one in iPark where a lot of people are there. So I'm adding the trunk, and you can see when you add the trunk, I want to make sure that I'm leaving some bits here and there, because if you squint your eyes, if you see the reference, The trunks are not everywhere. It's only on certain areas because there are a couple of cherry blossom flowers which are in the cherry blossom leaves which are in the front of the trunk, and that gives the illumination of the foreground and the background in the trees, and it also creates a volume for our trees as well. And you can see I also simplified the trees at the top as well. So this is the shadow. The shadow is super subtle. When I looked at the reference again and again, and it is surprising that the shadow is super pale on cherry blossom. And you can see I'm mixing blue and a little bit of red in it because I want to get that little bit of purplish shadow in it. And you can also use cobalt blue and a little bit of white paint in it as well. You can see as soon as we add the shadow, we kind of created that shadow for the cherry blossom. And I also don't want to overdo it, and I'm also splattering some water on top of it, so that gives a little bit of loose edges and odd edges in our the leaves on the cherry blossom tree, and which also create contrast. And that's one of the really important thing we have to when we paint in watercolors, is to create contrast, because watercolors tends to go dry, so we want to make sure that we cannot create that contrast, the volume for the tree, the lighting and the shadows. And I'm also adding a little bit of darker shadow to create the 3D feeling in our trees. Think whenever you paint a tree, think the tree as like a sphere where there's a light, where there's a shadow, and there is also a darker shadow as well. So now I'm adding the shadows in the midground, and it shouldn't be darker in the midground because when things go in distance, the valley gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So you want to make sure that in order to create depth or perspective in your painting, this another way you could create perspective in your painting is through varying your values from light to the dark. And you can see I'm making sure to add some the shadows for the grass. And for the grass I'm using a little bit of green, and for the green I mix Cerulean Blue. For the darker one I use French Ultramarine Blue and Cadmium Yellow, so that gives this darker shadow as well. And you can see I'm also made up the scene a little bit better, and I also made the shadows a little bit in an angle because that provides a beautiful contrast in our scene as well, and that also helps us to show the lighting and shadow in a beautiful way, because angle shows a lot of contrast and designing than anything else. But that's the other thing I realized in my residency of painting, that you should design your painting and you should be able to change everything in your painting to create an impact in your painting and showing compositional in a really good way. So that's a really beautiful thing about being a painter or a photographer, because painters can change a lot of stuff and they can design their painting. And I really enjoy the process of when I'm painting it. And next time when you paint, don't paint as it is, try to change everything in your painting to show an impact and create a powerful composition. One of the example I want to talk about is the tree. The tree is covering the building, but I made the building bigger and I showed the cherry blossom tree bigger. And I'm using white paint to bring some of the highlights in the cherry blossom tree. It rather came out nice. I really enjoyed the shadows which is peeking through in the foreground, because that creates a contrast between the lighting and the shadow from the midground to the foreground. So now it's your turn. Take one of the reference from your phone or from your friends similar to it, or which has trees in it with a lot of colors in it, and try to create an impactful composition and design your painting. And that's one of the thing I want you to take from this video. Thanks again for watching this cherry blossom painting tutorial. Please feel free to share your thoughts on this video in the comment section below. If you have any other topics related to watercolors that you'd like me to cover, please reach out to me at watercolorimpressions@gmail.com or leave a comment down below. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for weekly uploads, and share with your fellow artists, friends and family. And good luck with your painting, folks.